Today, part 2 of the Client Manager webinar series. Today, we'll be focusing on batch and search, what we'll be covering today in part 2. So today I will be covering, firstly, custom filters and explaining what the filtering mechanism is in Client Manager so you can really find the tax returns you want based on very specific data points. Second, once we've got our custom filters sorted out, we will look at save searches, how I can save a combination of filters for reuse later on. Then we'll be getting into column layouts. Not only do I want to filter on specific data points of my returns and save those for reuse day after day, but I also want to have very specific columns that show those data points for me. Once we've gone through those 3 steps, I'll be circling back to the batch functions, so how you can perform actions on many returns at once. And lastly, I'll wrap up with a look at our Excel exports, so how you can take your search results from Client Manager and export those into an Excel spreadsheet for further processing. Right, so let's jump right in. So I'm going to go to tax cycle here. I've already got tax cycle started up. I will be using the same data set, same set of clients as I did in part 1 of the Client Manager webinar series. So this will be a natural continuation from there. Right, quick searches. So if you look here on the right-hand side of the tax cycle window, we see the quick search menu item. This particular menu item covers the quick searches and the save searches, which we'll be getting to a little later on. And more specifically today, custom filters, or particularly right now, I should say. I should also point out here that I like to have my quick searches bar on the right-hand side of my screen, and I do pin it, so when I open it, it stays open. If I was to unpin this, when I click away, the quick searches sidebar will slide away. This is very similar to the prepare index within tax cycle when you're preparing your return. And also, just like that, we can move it to the left-hand side of the screen. This also moves the recent file list as well. Again, will collapse if it's not pinned. So that enables you to move it around your tax cycle window, and you can set that up on whichever side you prefer. I like mine on the right, so I'm going to leave it there for the rest of the webinar, and I'm also going to pin it so it stays open and doesn't hide when I'm talking about the various filters. Right, so for custom filters, so I'm just simply going to go in here and push enter to run a full list for my Client Manager. And here are my results. So what I can use here, I'll just click on the column header there just to collapse the return type. I can start selecting various items here within the custom filter. So in this case, I only want to see my 2018 and 29 returns, and I only want to see it for T1. I will point out when you do select a specific return type, that the transmission status column, which is sort of a collation of all the different statuses for the types of returns you can transmit, which there are numerous these days. When you select a specific return type, that column is broken down into the individual transmission types. A bit later on, when we get to the column layouts, I'll show you how you can reorganize or remove the transmission types that you may or may not use within your practice, just to keep the view concise. So there's no limit on the number of options I can select here. I can leave items selected. You notice that even when it's collapsed, this little green check mark next to the column, the category header here will indicate that one item within this category has been selected and is actively filtering the view that you see here in Client Manager. We have a host of categories from the year return type, the types of files. In this case, I only want to look at tax cycle files. Client Manager will index a whole host of competitor files. So if you move into tax cycle this year for the first time, your prior year returns you've prepared and filed with competitor software will actually show here in Client Manager right next to your new tax cycle files. I'll collapse that. We'll go down to the taxpayer category here. So the taxpayer category sort of enables us to fine-tune the types of taxpayers within the return. Say, for example, I only want to see returns that have a single taxpayer in them, as opposed to, say, a return that may be coupled or have dependents. Again, different data points depending on what you're after. Most of these later ones here have been the result of direct feedback. So if you feel that you want to filter a return on a particular data type that our filters don't cover right now, please let us know and we'll see if we can add that filter for you. Go to the return status. So this is using the workflow return status category. So the individual workflow tasks, as you go through your return and you start ticking off, I've received my source documents, I've prepared my DocCycle file, I've engaged with the client and so forth. You can filter on all those particular data points. In this case here, the return status is the entire category itself. So transmission and filing, any returns that are actually in progress. Let me just, in this particular case, I don't, but as you can imagine, or not started, and so forth. So this would be any returns where the transmission and filing workflow group is not started. We can combine these. Also just note that with return status, if you're waiting for a client or not waiting for a client, you can also filter on that very specific data point. And to remove this, we can simply use the cross here on the right-hand side, and that will remove this particular condition. And as you can see, the green check mark is gone from our category header. We can go down to transmission. So for example, T1E file, that's ready to file, F3, so we can combine the transmission status. In this case, I'm going to pick on T1E file again, and this time confirmed signature, because in my practice here, to get to the confirmed signature stage just before we transmit the return, that's sufficient for me to warrant that the return is ready for transmission. So there's no limit to the combination of filters you can have here. You can continually keep adding and tweaking and so forth. I'm just going to remove those for now to just show more results here. Collapse transmission. The workflow. So each individual workflow task that you can complete as you go through the preparation of a return can be filtered on. The workflow list is quite long. So for example, here I will pick on, what will I pick on? So for example, a client which we've sent an invoice is yes. And let me say payment received is no. Everything here is in alphabetical order. All the workflow tasks across all the modules here are present. So say payment received is no. And there we go. So now I've gone through all the returns in Client Manager. I want to see all the returns where I have indicated that a invoice has been sent on workflow, where I track the progress of my return, and where the payment has yet to be received. Using that one again, just like these other transmission and return status, we can simply use the cross here on the right-hand side to remove that particular filter criteria and move on. We have a correspondence section here for depending on how clients prefer to be communicated with, whether they like to receive things in the mail or whether they prefer to be emailed, etc. I will call out the dates section here. We have a whole range of various dates that you can filter a return on. In this case, I'm going to go for the year end of returns because I'm looking for particular T2 returns in this case. I'm going to say the year end is in between 2008, 2018, 01, 01, and 2018-12-12, please, 31. There we go. So there is those particular types of returns. Now I've noticed here that though I was looking for T2 returns, I still have the T1 option here filtered. Just below the client search box that we went through in the prior part 1 of this webinar series, we call this the crumb bar, the filter crumb bar. So as we start adding various types and adding things here, for example, I'm going to add T2, you notice that the crumb bar here updates to reflect all of the active filters. So if I was to hide my quick searches sidebar, move it off to the side, I can still have a very quick overview of what filters are in effect. Now in this case here, I was only really interested in the T2 returns where the year ends January 1 through December 31st. So I'm just going to simply click on the cross here in the crumb bar and remove all the T1 returns from my filter. So I don't actually have to come back to my quick searches and deselect it here. It's quite interactive here through the crumb bar. So as we can see now, there's all my T2 returns with the year end within the specified date range. So if I wanted to act on these T2 returns, I really narrowed down the search results. Lastly, here on the crumb bar, when I'm talking about quick searches, we'll delve a little bit more into quick searches when we look at save searches next. We can actually refresh our data from Client Manager. This will go and requery the Client Manager service for all the returns and then reapply these existing filters. What I can do is I can clear my filters in one go. That will simply remove everything, and I go back to my default list. You'll notice that none of the custom filter categories have their green check mark anymore, and full list is back on. So that's a very quick way to reset everything back to the default view, and then you can start recompiling, say, to my particular filters and so forth as you look to narrow the particular returns you're looking for. So that is an overview of the custom filters. As I said, next we'll be combining custom filters with saved searches to show how we don't have to keep re-entering these all over again. So now that we've covered the custom filters and how we can use any combination of filters to filter the tax returns within the Client Manager database to get the specific returns we want, I'm going to now talk a little bit about saved searches. So a saved search is essentially a set of predefined custom filters that you save so you can run the save search over and over and over again, so you don't have to come back into custom filters and select all the individual data points to get your returns. So I am going to quickly, the quick searches here, I had previously narrowed this to the NR4 type just to simply collapse this up to make custom filters more accessible. I'm just going to clear all. I'm only going to, I can select them all here. So this is all of the saved searches that we have. These are the default ones within TaxCycle. So for example, if you select ready for our T1 e-file, we have a predefined filter that selects your T1 returns, TaxCycle files only, where either we want to confirm the signature or the returns are in this particular state. A return state will enable it to be e-filed and so forth. In this case, TaxCycle files only. So we do have a whole host of preset, let's scroll up, quick searches, say for example any returns that we're waiting for a signature or no signs T183 on file, for example. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create a new saved search. So I'm going to go down here, I'm going to clear all my filters. I'm going to select say my 2019 or 2018 returns. I would like my T1 returns. Transmission, selection, T1 e-file, confirm signature, or T1 e-file is ready to file. So here we go. We can see using the crumb bar here that I have a set of custom filters in effect. I obviously don't want to have to come and do this every single time I want to see returns to e-file. So what I can do now is I can come here and click the Save as New Search hyperlink that sits just above the custom filters. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. This will create a new entry for us with a default name. It does focus the box straight away, so I'm going to put to e-file 2188 or 2019, just to give it a little bit more description for me. So you can simply push enter or click the save icon here. And there we go. Now we've got our saved search. This is available to us all the time now. I should note that if you are using an options profile, which I am in this case, whenever you create a saved search, or later as we'll see a custom column layout, the saved search and the column layout are in fact saved into the options profile. So when you create your quick searches, this list, and then you say add saved searches to this list, those saved searches are available to everyone in the office. I don't really want my saved search here to be at the bottom, so I can simply click on it and drag it more towards the top where I want it to be. So that's where it is. You don't have to stick with that order. And since I've reorganized or reordered the list of saved searches here, I have to click the save button here just to make sure that list stays in order. This show only searches for, in this case I'll pick T1 TP1. You'll notice that my new saved search is still visible. That's because in the return type, I had selected the T1, TP1 return type. This is what this particular filter looks at. So for example, if you're only really focused on T1 returns for the current week or month, you can just narrow your save searches to save searches that are relevant for T1. So here in the Save Search, you'll see, like custom filters, there's a green check mark next to the Save Search. What this indicates is that this is the active saved search. If I simply click the Save Search again, my green check mark goes away, and this indicates that there is no Save Search in effect, and we just have the raw full list, no values. So I will tick that again. If I wish to select another Save Search, you just simply select it, and you see that the green arrow, the green check will move with me. And I can simply go back and so forth like that. Now, for example, what I've done here is I've created a 2E file 2018 or 19. Now, obviously, we already have a ready to T1E file existing Save Search. Now, the big difference here is that this particular Save Search does not have any year information attached to it. So rather than creating the Save Search like I had done in this particular example, I could have selected the existing ready to T1E file Save Search, come down to the year here and simply applied the years that I want as well. And now that I've made some changes to this existing Save Search, you'll notice that the save icon is available. So I simply click Save, and now all I have done there is simply update the Save Search that ships with TaxCycle by default to include a little bit more information to make it more relevant for what I'm doing. So the existing Save Searches aren't set in stone. Once you create them, you can obviously tweak them and modify them by adding or removing filters that are relevant for the search that you're running. So there we go. So I'm going to go ahead now and create another Save Search. I'm going to clear all filters. I want my 2018 or 2019 workflow. I'm going to pick on my invoice sent, yes, and payment received is no. I should note here that when I do select for specific types of workflow tasks, I can also say if the invoice was sent today, this week, this month, or so forth, just to indicate. So I'll say this week, because I only really want to follow up people that I've invoiced this week as well, which is a really fine-tuning this filter. So now I've got everything I want, my 2019, 2018 returns. The invoice has been sent, but I've yet to receive payment. So I'm going to save this as a new search. Invoice, but not paid yet. There we go. So now I've saved that particular set of custom filters into this new saved search, invoice, but not yet paid. And I might move that up to the top as well and save that. Again, I have to save when I reorder my saved searches. So the next thing I wanted to talk about with saved searches, now that we've created a couple based on some selections. If we right-click on a saved search, we have quite a rich context menu here. So the first thing I want to do here, in fact, I might select my 2T1 e-file here, is I can right-click and set as default search. So what does that do? By setting this saved search as my default search, when I open TaxCycle for the first time and I go into Client Manager, this is the saved search that will run. By default, Client Manager will run the full list. You may not want that, perhaps depending on what time of year you're in. For example, at this time of year, you may want to have a saved search to run by default that is identifying clients that you need to engage with still or haven't responded to your initial engagement correspondence. Perhaps later on in March or April, you actually want to change your default saved search to the returns that you need to e-file. So again, because I've made a modification to my saved search list, I just need to save that back. And there we go. The other right-click menu items we have, we can simply rename our search. Perhaps you didn't like the name initially. Simply done like that. If I wanted to rename a saved search, you can actually rename the existing ones as well. That they're fully customizable. And we can create a clone. This is convenient if you've got one saved search and I want to create another saved search that's very similar but not quite the same. So rather than creating a brand new one by default and then having to select all the filters again, you can simply clone an existing saved search and then go and tweak that and give it its own name. Delete, you can delete the saved search if you wish. Now restore defaults. Restore defaults will essentially go back to TaxCircle and say, what are all the default saved searches? I just want those. And any customizations that have been made or any of my own saved searches that I've created will simply be removed, and I'll go back to the default set that TaxCircle ships with. So that's a great thing to do if you want to experiment with saved searches and using custom filters, but you may not want to save them. You can save them, tweak them, and so forth. And when you're done experimenting, you can simply use this restore defaults menu item here just to put TaxCircle back into the default state. Change column layout. We'll be speaking about that a little later on in this webinar, but essentially what you can do is you can associate an existing column layout with a saved search. That's a fantastically powerful tool where, depending on the saved search that you want, you can really fine-tune the columns that you see for that particular saved search rather than seeing a generic or standard column layout. And lastly here, the quick search saved options. It's a little shortcut to jump straight into the correct area of options. Quick searches and columns are saved under the Client Manager item here under Options. I am using an options profile, so every change I make to my quick searches or save searches or later, as you'll see, columns are saved back to the options profile and available to any other preparer in my office that also shares that options profile with me. So as we can see here, the two eFile 2018 and 19 saved search that I've created here is listed in my options, and it's got the default T1 TP1 layout associated with it. I'm going to change that. Again, the invoice but not yet paid saved search that I just created is visible here under my quick searches. And again, it's got this T1 TP1 default layout associated with it. Later on in the next section of this webinar, we'll talk about how we can create a more tailored column layout and associate that with our new saved searches. So far in Client Manager Part 2 of this webinar, we've covered custom filters, saved searches, how we can save a set of custom filters. And now I wanted to talk more about column layouts. So we've decided what data we want to look at, we've saved those filters, and now I really want to fine-tune the presentation of the search results to just show the data points that are relevant to me, or more importantly, relevant to the saved search that I've just created and selected. So if we pick up from where we left off, this here is this quick searches section under options. We can see all the quick searches that were saved, and we can see the associated column layout that is attached to that saved search. So if I come down here into options, and just below saved searches, we see the section called columns. I might make this window a little bit wider so we can see more. So the columns section in options is what allows you to create a custom view or a column layout that you can then use in Client Manager. You don't have to associate it with the saved search, but you can, which is what I'm going to do. So by default, here is the standard column layout. When you run a full list for the first time and you have not specified any particular filter, this is the layout that you will see, and these are all the columns that you will see here in Client Manager, here in the search grid. Let's move that back up. So we've got a contact and an invoicing layout and a TP1 layout and so forth. You'll notice that some of the differences here between the standard column layout is that we use the transmission statuses box. That is one column where it has all the transmission statuses for all the relevant transmission types for a given return. We here, for example, in the T1 TP1 layout, rather than having the generic transmission statuses column, we've actually broken it down into each of the individual columns that you can have. But what I want to do now is I want to create a specific eFile column layout so I can associate that with the two eFile save search that I just created moments ago. So at the bottom of this list here, I can double click on new column layout. And of course, 2 eFile 218-2019. You can give it the name anything you like. There's no specific rules you have to follow or anything like that. So with my new column layout, it has essentially selected these columns for me, and these are the default columns. So what I can do here is I don't really want that information. You can use the arrows here to move them back over into the available columns list. These are all the columns that I can move into my column layout, and these are all the columns that already exist. So I don't really want the transmission statuses box, so I'm just going to drag that over, and I'm going to assume that AFR has been done. I'm not too worried about my notice of assessment just yet. Okay, and I've received my info. So what I want to do here is I really want to look at the status of eFile. So if I come down here to T1 eFile, I can drag that over, and once it's dragged over, you can reposition it in your column layout. So now I've just got the eFile status column there. I would also like to move my authorization in there, like that. So here we've got my new column layout to eFile, and these are just the columns that I want to see. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that. Click OK. And now here are my search results. Just next to the time it took to run that search, here's the change grid layout option. I'm going to drop that down, and now you'll see this is the active layout that's in effect. In fact, I might just close that to give us a bit more space. So I'm going to select my column layout option. The bold one is the one that's active. But as we'll see down the bottom here, here's my new column layout. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. So as we can see now, there's a lot less noise in my search result here. I have just the columns that I want to see that are relevant for me for the returns that I want to eFile. So that's very good. I've just noticed that I would actually prefer to see one more column, so I can come back into my options, make changes to my options profile. I'll make this window a little bit bigger again. Scroll down, got my two eFile layouts selected, and I actually want to put my T1013 status in there. The authorization column's nice, but I'd like to see the little transmission graphic as well. So I can come back and I'm going to put that there, like so. So once you've created your column layout, you can come back and edit it, reorder it, and tweak it, and so forth. So that's good. I actually want to see the T1013 column in there as well. Whilst I'm in here coming back and editing my existing 2eFile column layout, I will talk a little bit about these column layout options. So allow reordering of columns. If this option is selected, that means in TaxCycle, I can actually reorder the columns directly from the search results. I don't need to come back into the options here and reorder them here in my select columns. I can simply do that directly from here by dragging and dropping the columns around. Likewise, allow the removal of columns. That allows me to modify by removing columns that perhaps I thought I wanted, but now I don't want, directly from the search grid here. Depending on how you lock down your options or how you want your preparers to use these column layouts, you may want to turn those off. Or if you're happy for preparers to change things around, then you can leave those options on. So now that I've added my new T1013 column, I'm going to apply. Okay. And now as we see, my new column here has the T1013 column associated. And to my point earlier, in fact, I do want the authorization before that. Because I have allow column reordering enabled, I'm going to put that right there. And there we go. I might just resize it over. So now what I have done is I have created a new column layout, specifically targeting just the points of data I want to see for transmitting a return. So now that I've done that, it'd be really handy, which I've already done because I left this selected, to associate this column layout with the save search. Because I had selected the save search here, and this is the one that's active, TaxCycle was smart enough to realize that this save search has been modified. And if I simply click the save button here, and perhaps I go to invoice not paid, which goes back to the default column layout, or my TB1 layout, I should say. Now when I select my 2E file save search, TaxCycle has conveniently detected that, okay, when you select this save search, I also want to present the data using this column layout, because this is the column layout that makes the most sense for me when I select that save search. So one more thing I'm going to do here, I did create the invoice but not yet paid, and as we noticed, the column layout is the TP1 column layout, which is not the best. I could change it to invoicing layout here, but I'll just go back into options just to reinforce this. Back under, say, the quick searches. Let's make this dialog a little bit bigger so we can see it. And go back to invoice but not yet paid. I can simply come back in here and I'll select my invoicing layout instead, because that column layout makes more sense for this save search. You can go through and do this for any of the save searches. You can do them all at once. It's a bit easier to do it here, and then you can apply that. Again, if you wish, I could assign the default column layout to every module again, and then go if I wished to reset them. So now I'm going to go ahead and apply that, go OK. Just change the searcher there as my column layout for my 2E file. And now when I select my invoiced but not yet paid saved search, TaxCycle has now automatically selected the invoicing layout for me, because this is really the data I want to see when I'm looking at my invoicing saved search. So one little thing I did want to call out before I ask John to run the next poll is I'm just going to go back here. I'm going to remove my save search, and I'm going to change my column layout to the standard column layout, and I'm going to collapse that to make this a bit bigger. I had alluded to earlier that this transmission status column is really an aggregation of all the transmission statuses within the given return. Now this will show every eligible transmission type within the return, perhaps whether or not you wish to file it or not. So a common request that we've received is, how do I actually narrow down the list of transmission types in this column that just makes sense? So I'm going to show you how to do that quickly now. So if I go back into options and I go to transmission workflow, make changes because I'm in an options profile, make that a little bit bigger. This transmission types section of the workflow options here, there's a column here that says show in search results. So for example, senders off, because we don't use that. Perhaps I don't do the pre-authorized debit transmission type. I can simply add that back or remove it so it doesn't show. And perhaps if you're in Western Canada and you don't actually file returns to Revenue Quebec, you can say, I don't want to see my net file transmission types or my MR69. Or conversely, if you're in Eastern Canada and you don't want to see the Alberta Finance 81 net file, you can simply turn that off as well. So now if I apply that, okay, you'll notice now that in this case, the PAD, the net file, and the MR69 transmission statuses have actually been hidden or removed from this column, just to make things a little bit more concise. Again, back in options, transmission workflow, you can customize which transmission types appear. I'm turning them all back on in the aggregated view of the transmission status column. Just as a tip there, in case you don't actually use the entire set of transmissions available to you for the given return type. So now that we've sort of got through applying filters, saving those filters in save searches, and then creating a custom column layout and associating that custom column layout with my save search, I would like to move on to the batch functions. So a batch function in TaxCycle is essentially an action that can be performed on one or more tax returns. I mean, a great example of this is you could select all of your 2018 T1 returns and carry them forward. So then you create all your 2019 T1 returns at once. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select my 21E file here. Got my filter with my save search, identify the returns I want to e-file. It's selected my column layout for me. So now I actually want to batch transmit these returns. So how do I go about doing that? So on the left-hand side here of the search results, we have these checkboxes. So these checkboxes essentially add each individual return to the batch. So as you can see, as I check this item here, the number of batch items increases or decreases if I deselect it. So there's a little count to show you how many items are currently in the batch. You'll also notice here against the file name, which I have included in this column layout, there's now a padlock. So essentially what's happened now is TaxCycle has said, okay, Andrew, you're going to perform a batch operation. I'm going to put an exclusive lock on that file so no one else in the office can open it and make changes because it's in a state that I'm happy with, and I want to perform a batch action on this file. In this case, I'm going to do a batch transmit. Rather than having to go through and select each individual file, which is not very painful here because I only have 4 search results, but you can imagine if you had hundreds, you can simply click the box here in the header, and that will select every single return that's currently in view. I should also note that when we add items to the batch, these items are in the batch. If I was to clear my filters and go and select someone else, let's pick another T1 return here. Let's do Charles. I can also add Charles to my batch. But you'll notice, though, that I actually still have 5 batch items. So even though I've run a new search, those other files that I had previously selected are still reserved for me in my batch. So I can continually run different searches, different filters, and slowly build up my batch of files I want to perform an action on over and over again. I don't have to, perform a search, run a batch action, then go run a different search, run a batch action, and so forth. I can continually build my batch of returns up as I go along, or find returns that meet my criteria for the batch operation that I want to run. So I'm going to go back to my save search, which is proving to be quite handy. And as we can see, the new search results have come in. TaxCycle's detected that they were already reserved in my batch, so it has pre-selected these for me, which is very convenient. So how do I actually go into the batch operation mode? So I click on my batch items button here, and now we are in Client Manager Batch. So just a quick overview of the Client Manager Batch view here. So we have various batch operations we can run, whether it be a carry forward, a transmit, a print. If I want to print a given set of returns all at once, so for example, I need to get some engagement letters out or so forth for these 10 returns, you find those 10 returns, you add them to your batch, you select the print batch operation, and then you can simply type in the name of the print set that you have saved in your options. You can separate them with a semicolon if you want to use more than one print set, and then have TaxCycle go batch print those returns for you. Print labels, the return purpose. You may, for example, if you do a bulk carry forward and you set the from 2018 to 2019, you may want to tag all of your 2019 returns as in planning, so you don't accidentally file them later on before you've actually finished them. And calculate if you wish to run a batch calculate. But I'm going to go here to batch transmit. Batch transmit, not batch print. Under transmit, we have all the transmission types that are eligible for batch transmission. Certain return types are not eligible for batch transmission. Examples of those would be T4 slip filing. You have to interact with the browser with the CRA in that case, and that's not really possible to perform that in a batch operation. But here I'm going to select T1 e-file. And here we see these are the returns that I had to batch e-file. Now what I've already noticed here is I only have 3 returns visible, but I have 5 items in my batch. So what's going on? So here in my standard options, I have the hide ineligible returns option selected. What this is saying is I'm going to hide from view any returns that you can't transmit for T1 e-file. So if I take that off, I can now see here all my 5 returns that I selected for my batch operation. Now, Charles's return here is still waiting to resolve some review messages, so that makes sense. I'm actually going to go ahead and deselect Charles now because I'm not even going to try and transmit that return. And there they go. Now, Philippa here is actually ready to transmit, but why is she showing as ineligible? The return status here is in the print and sign mode. Now, if you wish, you can say confirm signed documents on transmit. So when you perform this batch operation, if your return status is waiting for T183 signature, you can have the batch operation automatically complete that task for you and then transmit the return. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And Philippa should have been enabled there. If I just change off that, I'm not sure what happened there. T20 file. Yes, that's correct. When I selected this option here, I would have expected Philippa's return to show a little less transparent to indicate that it wouldn't actually be eligible for this return. I will investigate that. Right, so now I'm ready to perform a batch operation. In this case, I'm going to transmit these 4 tax returns. I've indicated that I'm happy for the return status to be waiting to sign and not necessarily straight into the ready to transmit status. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a pre-flight. Now, what the heck is pre-flight? So the pre-flight operation here will go through all the returns in the batch and I'll check it just before I transmit it to make sure that everything's correct. So the pre-flight operation has gone through, has detected that there are no changes have been made since I last saved this return and before I'm going to batch transmit it. So that to me indicates that these returns are good to go. So it does, the pre-flight will do all that pre-checking without actually transmitting the return. It's a great way to catch any last minute alterations to a return that perhaps may have been missed, or that return was prepared several weeks ago and something about that return has changed and it needs to be addressed before it can be transmitted. So I'm just going to go ahead here and click Start. And the batch operation is going. And as we can see, we've now done that. So what tax cycle will do now that Lawrence's return has been successfully transmitted, we have the document control number, the confirmation number, and the exact return status of the return that we got back from the CRA. So they've all been successfully transmitted, which is very, very good. So that there is an example of using the batch transmit operation to transmit, in this case, 4 tax returns to the CRA at once. I would stress that you can use a batch operation for just 1 return, or you can use it for hundreds of returns. It's really up to you and what you feel most comfortable with. As I said earlier, we do have a set of batch functions: carry forward, transmit, print labels, return purpose, and calculate. I did actually want to touch on calculate a little bit before we go. So batch calculate allows us to query up to 5 fields within a tax return and display those on screen. Now I'm going to leave these batch my 4 returns in here already. So if I was to click Start, so I have a description, exclamation point, and the particular expression or the field code from inside of the return. We can edit that if we wish, just like we would use a data monitor when you're preparing a return. So I'm going to go ahead and click Start. So what happened there is this batch calculate operation has gone through, it's opened up each individual return in read-only, and it has extracted the refund field, the owing field, and the installments field from the returns in my batch. This is a fairly powerful way to look for very specific values on particular forms within your returns. And of course, once you've got that with any batch operation, I will call this out now, you can export your search results to Excel if you wish to then analyze those results a bit later. So that is an overview of the Client Manager batch operation. It's fairly powerful. You can do a whole bunch of things with this, or at least process returns for, say, carry forward, do all your returns at once rather than having to do them one at a time. So I'm just going to exit the batch by selecting the back arrow. So now I'm back in Client Manager. As you can see that my ready to e-file filter is still in effect, and of course because those T1 returns have been filed, they're now no longer eligible, and therefore they don't show within this result. But if I was to pick T1 transmitted, oh, I should change the year just to make that show up. And I'm going to change the column layout to that just to make it easier to see. As you can see, here are the 4 returns that were previously showing in the to transmit save search and now showing in the successfully transmitted save search. And of course, now that it's been done, I can use clear batch to get rid of them all at once, or select each individual one to remove them from the batch. And now that they've gone, the padlock has also been removed from the file to indicate that this return can be opened by others in the office. So now that I've run batch operations and I've got my save searches and my column layouts, I just wanted to speak a little quickly to the Excel export. So next to the column layouts button here above the search results, we have email search results button. So if you want, say for example here's the list of returns I've transmitted today, and I want to email this to someone off for further review, I can click this button here. This will create an email and attach the search results I see on screen into an Excel spreadsheet and then attach that to the email so then I can send that to the relevant recipient. To the right-hand side of the email button, we actually have the export search results button. From here, we can drop that down. And we have 5 options here. So the export to an Excel workbook will export what I see on screen to Excel, exactly what you see here with these columns to Excel. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And there we go. I'm going to do a little trick where I select everything and double click on the column, click on the height to get everything nice and condensed. So this spreadsheet is what I saw in tax cycle with what has been exported to Excel. I would note that the transmission state, because this has the e-files transmission status column, this one here, the tax cycle will automatically put the date and the confirmation number next to that column in my export, just for a good practice in housekeeping there essentially. Now this data may not quite be enough, so the next option we have is export a detailed Excel workbook. So what's the difference between regular workbook and detailed workbook? So let's take a look. Again, let's do my little cheat to reorganize this data so it's more readable. So this export has done exactly the same as my earlier export, but what it has done, it has added a set of predefined columns on the end. So the target completion date is return overdue, the status, the household address, and so forth. So some extra columns here that over the years we've expanded based on your feedback, that you find to be extra information that with your regular export, what you see in these columns with this extra information tagged on the end to be quite helpful. The next one is return status. This will give me the overall status of, as I go through and prepare my return, as I track that. So there we go, the return completed and so forth. The last two I'm not going to export. So export the contact information, well, in fact I am going to export it. This is a predefined report that will take all the information from each return and then put the relevant contact information and all sorts of combinations of, like the whole household name, the individual name, and so forth, with the spouse information. So then you can use this information here, for example, for a mail merge from Office or anything like that. We have all the various ways to get in touch with everyone and so forth. Go back to tax cycle. And the last export we offer is the full data export. This, I'm not going to run this. This will take all of the data from Client Manager, so not what you see on screen, but all the data in the Client Manager database, and export that into a full Excel spreadsheet. And from there, you can then look for more detailed information based on the hundreds of data points that report will include. So that is an overview of our Excel workbooks. You can export directly from search results, or as I mentioned earlier, when you run a batch operation, you can export from here, and even back here on transmit, you can say I want to export the results of my transmission that I saw here earlier to an export to Excel as well. So lots of ways to get your data out of Client Manager and into Excel if you wish to perform further analysis using the tools that Excel comes with. So that draws to a conclusion my Client Manager Part 2 webinar today. I do hope that you found this useful or informative, and there are some features in here that you can apply to your practice to make things a bit smoother for this coming filing season. As always, we have extensive help online for Client Manager, talking through all the particular going through all the particular points I covered in today's webinar. I do encourage you to read that if you want to learn more about it. As always, if you have any feedback or questions, please email us at info@taxcycle.com, and we'd love to hear you and use that feedback from your polls to help push TaxCycle forward. So with that, I wish you a very good rest of your day, and I will now sign off. Okay, bye now.